Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Buenos dias, buenas tardes, bonjour. In Barbados, we'd say we're going on. I'm bringing out all my language skills for this final day of the Island Finance Forum 2022. It's wonderful to have you all here, and it's really been a fantastic week of sessions and discussions. So I know that today's discussion is definitely going to live up to everything that has come before. I hope everyone's enjoyed the engaging and the really dynamic sessions we've had so far today. And just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Stacey Alvarez de la Campa. I am the content manager and community manager here at Island Innovation. It's great to have you all with us. And as mentioned in the chat by our team, we're going to launch a poll shortly so that we can get an idea of where you're from and which sectors are being represented here today. And as I said, you can please feel free to post any comments you have in the chat. We really would like this to be as interactive a session as possible. You know, this is your chance to get to interact with some, leading figures in the field here. And any questions you have, please use the Q&A box so that we can kind of keep a track of what kind of questions you're asking and who you'd like to address those questions to, okay? So without further ado, today's topic is the Coastal Quandary, Financing the Future of Coastal Tourism. And that's a topic that has extreme resonance and relevance for any island community, throughout the world today. Today, we have an extremely esteemed panel made up of Dr. Sami Joseph, who is the Deputy Premier of the Government of Montserrat. He is delivering our keynote address today. There will also be a recorded message from Kushal Raj, who's head of climate change and international cooperation of Fiji. This will be followed by a session with Sylvia Garrigo, the Senior Vice President and Chief ESG Officer of the Royal Caribbean Group. And then we also have Petro Manufa, the CEO of the Tourism Authority of the Government of Kiribati. So before we start, I just wanted to put a little bit of context, provide our discussion with the foundation. As I mentioned, island communities are traditionally quite reliant on tourism. And we now also have to grapple with the impacts of the climate crisis in an industry which provides a great deal of economic stability. And I see that we have the results for a poll up. So we can see a huge presence, almost equal, from Europe and North America. And we also have the Caribbean very strongly represented as well. And the various sectors, we see the private sector is really representing here today. So this actually is very relevant in terms of us facilitating as much collaboration between, say, the public and private sector in order to address this particular issue. So, we've seen throughout the region, we have rising sea levels, we have to grapple with coastal erosion, there's increasing frequency and severity of storms, and this clearly threatens the resilience of the industry. This threatens the resilience of the tourist industry. And, tourism is a sector that, as I mentioned, provides a huge economic underpinning to the stability of many islands, and also particularly coastal tourism, because coastal regions do tend to be one of the reasons that visitors come to island communities to experience that. So we have to see, how can we address this very perplexing question? Is financing the answer? How can we seek to have sustainable levels of tourism? So we're going to start with our keynote address from Dr. Sami Joseph, the Deputy Premier of the Government of Montserrat. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Sami Joseph, and thank you to all our panelists. Dr. Joseph, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stacey. And I would also like to wish everybody good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and to thank Island Innovation for this opportunity to give this talk today. The topic I was given, which is very interesting, is the Coastal Quandary, Financing the Future of Coastal Tourism. And as the brief thing that went out, often reliant on tourism, island communities around the world are having to reckon with impacts of the climate crisis on industry. You have rising sea levels, you have coastal erosion, and more frequent severe storm events. So the question has to be asked now, what is the future of coastal tourism, and can finance improve its outlook? Now, coastal areas include some of the richest and most fragile ecosystems on Earth, like mangroves and coral reefs. At the same time, the coasts are under very high population pressure. due to rapid urbanization processes. More than half the population of the world live in coastal areas. That's a very interesting statistics. Half of the population of the earth live in coastal areas, and this is on the rise. And we also know that countries such as Tuvalu, Kiribati, and the Marshall Islands are facing existential threats from rising sea levels, and these islands may not be around in the next 50 years. We have, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, third assessment report in 2001, a very interesting statement was made. And the crisis, he said that the climate change issue that we have now is a crisis of governance and not a crisis of the environment or a failure of the market. So the crisis that's happening now in climate change is a crisis of governance, and it is not a crisis of the environment or failure of the market. And we have to remember that. And what we have to ask ourselves, we have just come out of COP26, has anything really changed in terms of addressing the issues of climate change, and which have carry-on effects on our small island development states and in effects on our tourist industry, since as was pointed out by our host, that one of the reasons why people come to the Caribbean, the Pacific, and other islands is for our beaches and our coastal amenities that we offer in terms of tourism. There are also other issues that pop up from coastal tourism. We have loss of marine resources due to the destruction of coral reefs, overfishing, pollution of marine and freshwater resources, soil degradation and loss of land resources. So example, you have desertification and salinification due to excessive water use, overuse of fertilizers, erosion, and you also have problems with air pollution, loss of cultural resources and social disruption, loss of public access, and what we just spoke about, you have natural hazards, more hurricanes, and sea level rises. So with all these issues, the question can be asked, why small island developing states, SIDS, why do we even bother with coastal tourism? Why do we even bother with tourism? And the answer is very simple. It also has some positive economic impacts. So it contributes to government revenues, it contributes to our foreign exchange earnings, the generation of employment and business opportunities, and revitalization of culture and tradition. So therein lies the quandary that we face. The industry that pays the bills is disappearing due to external and internal factors, and the tourists that visit the SIDS and transfer their foreign currencies to the islands, they obtain the wealth from the developed world mostly, that are mainly responsible for climate change. So the tourists that you're seeking, they're coming from the developed countries that are causing the issues to kill, in some sense, the industries that we are so dependent upon to pay the bills. So the question as posed is, what is the future of coastal tourism? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on the will of governments and the people to switch to a more sustainable economy. So the paradox of a unified and global economy and a divided global society poses the single greatest threat to the planet, because it makes it impossible the cooperation needed to address the remaining challenges. That was said by Jeffrey Sachs in his book, Commonwealth. So the paradox of we have a uniform global economy, but we have a divided society. So it's making it very difficult for certain decisions to be made. But humanity has the technology, and we have the resources, and we have the capacity to halt climate change. The issue is will. So at the United Nations, 43 of the world's smallest islands are low-lying coastal countries representing member states, and they're the most susceptible to climate change. And they forge a coalition called the Alliance of Small Island States. While this coalition represents more than a quarter of the world countries together, they account for less than 1% of global carbon emissions, a statistics that we keep hearing over and over. Despite this last statistics, we must be a beacon to the world. And the point that has to stick with us, if the SIDS are to be saved and our tourist industry are to be saved, and if the SIDS are saved, it means that the world itself is saved. Saving the SIDS and saving our coastal regions is equivalent and is the same as saving the world. And that is a point that we have to keep making as small island developing states. So the future of coastal tourism will be dependent on the islands sticking together and reminding the big actors on the world stage of their moral obligations. So can finance improve its outlook? A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. That's a quote from the Bible. A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. So SIDS in the Caribbean are typically viewed as vulnerable and insignificant actors in world affairs, but we know that we have always punched above our weight. And we must self-identify and realize that we are large, big ocean states. So although our land mass may be small, when we look at the sovereign authority that we have over the world oceans, we're actually large states. So such authority is increasingly being exercised by the SIDS in the context of the blue economy as a mechanism to realize sustainable economic development from an ocean-based economy. So we have countries like Grenada who now have a blue growth coastal master plan and an integrated coastal zone and management policy. We have Barbados who now have a separate ministry assigned to the blue economy, the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and the blue economy, and is currently pursuing the development of a roadmap. So the point that we need to understand from these examples is that in order for coastal tourism to have a future, it has to be done in a sustainable way, and there has to be a set coastal management plan by each island state. The future of coastal tourism is still bright and will still be bright and will still have a future if the nation states implement proper coastal management practices. So I'm currently the Deputy Premier of Montserrat, which is a British overseas territory. And Montserrat is a mountainous, volcanic small island nation with a landmass of only 39.38 square miles. And the spear-shaped island forms part of the Lesser Antilles and is known as the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean, in part because of its Irish ancestry and its striking resemblance to coastal island. It is located 27 miles from Antigua and 30 miles from Guadeloupe. And the terrain is generally steep and the ocean depth increases quickly from the shoreline. So although Montserrat only measures about 16 miles in length and 7 miles in width, and it only has 25 miles of coastline, it has on its control 7,587 square kilometers of exclusive economic zone. And we are surrounded by lush green hills and translucent blue waters. And the residents of Montserrat enjoy a life that is tranquil, community-oriented, and focused on holistic prosperity. In 1995, the volcano eruption started on the island and wiped out infrastructure on the 2/3 of the island. So Montserrat now has a unique opportunity to capitalize on the emerging blue economy and to build forward better and to avoid many of the pitfalls associated with coastal tourism. So the opportunity exists to develop a more productive blue economy, to generate greater value, create equitable blue growth, and promote climate resilience. And in order to do that is something the government of Montserrat is focused on, and a lot of other islands are focused on, is port development, cruise and ferry stops, ecotourism, scuba diving and activities, and the berthing of yachts. For these activities to take place, it requires financing. So the answer to the question of whether finances can improve its outlook, the answer is yes. Finances can improve the outlook for coastal tourism and for small island development states if it's done in a sustainable manner. So Montserrat has currently received funding from the UK to pursue the building of a port project to the tune of about 100 million EC dollars. And that project is designed with climate resilience in mind, with sustainability measures in mind in terms of how do you deal with coral reefs, how do you deal with some of the issues that I raised forward. So it's not a matter that finance cannot help, it's a matter of how do we deploy the finance to avoid some of the issues that we know are coming. Since we know that these things are there, sea levels are going to rise, how do you build to take advantage is the wrong word. How do you build knowing that sea levels are going to rise? How do you build knowing that these things are coming? And that is the issue that we have to look at as small island developing states. How do we build forward knowing that what's going to happen? So when we seek financing, we should start first by looking locally. How do we get together locally to raise financing to do the things that we want to do? So in Montserrat case, we can revitalize the Montserrat Fishers Cooperative, get local funds to expand fishing so that it's done in a circular and sustainable way. And when foreign direct investments are done and negotiations are happened with partners to give foreign direct investments, to understand that if we do not build sustainable and if we do not use our resources in a sustainable manner, they will disappear, and we cannot kill the goose that is laying the golden egg, and we must have a long-term vision of how we plan to get these things done. And we do know with the rise of global warming, and something that has been discussed in this finance forum, we have things like carbon credits and carbon capture methods. And as was pointed out at the beginning, the coastal regions are some of the most eco-rich in terms of mangroves, which are known to be one of the best trees and plants to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So there are institutions and organizations that do pay and do finance projects that deal with rehabilitalizing coastal region in terms of carbon capture and things like that. So there are mechanisms on which financing can be done. It's just for us as small island developing states to find the right partner, the right mechanisms to get it done, and it can be done. Some of the specifics of the financial things I know we're going to discuss in the question and answer and the discussions afterward. But to answer the question, can finance change its outlook? Finance can change its outlook if it is done in a circular and sustainable method. I thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Joseph. That was extremely comprehensive. That was a wonderful overview. I think just some of the points that you touched on that really kind of jumped out to me would be, you know, the idea of coasts being home to such fragile ecosystems, such as mangroves and coral reefs, but those same fragile ecosystems, yet another paradox, are, you know, therein lies the strength for us to help with or to become more resilient in terms of mangroves providing extremely efficient carbon capture. Those are some of the natural solutions that we can pursue in this region. You gave a stark reminder of the existential threat that is being posed to some Pacific communities. And then I thought it was quite insightful that you made mention of the crisis in governance that is accompanying the kind of climate crisis, you know, and this links back to, you know, having deploying finances in a way that's sensible and sustainable, and having policies in order to effect such deployment, I think is crucial. You also mentioned terrestrial as well as marine issues that, you know, that can plague lots of island economies. The positive impacts of tourism, you're showing us that, you know, the positive impacts of tourism we have to be very aware of in this region. You know, the way that we can have revenue generated as a result of the presence of tourists, and the fact that we now have a community, we have AOSIS as it's called, you know, that collaboration and that forming of alliances between not small island developed states. I thought it was wonderful that you made reference to large ocean states, because we also need to look to change our narrative, you know, and see ourselves in the Caribbean region and any small island communities as being more empowered than we traditionally believe we are. So I like that you say the future is indeed bright, and that yes, the answer lies in sustainable financing and circular economic practices that can help facilitate the future of coastal tourism. Thanks very much for that, Dr. Joseph. So we're going to go on now to have a video message that has been delivered to us by Kushal Raj, who is the head of Climate Change and International Cooperation of Fiji. So I believe our host is going to share the screen and we will hear that message.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Good morning and Bula Vinaka to you all from Fiji. The Fijian tourism industry pre-COVID was responsible for almost 40% of our GDP and brought in around 2 billion in foreign exchange annually. COVID-19 brought this sector to a near complete standstill for well over a year. This was an unprecedented economic shock which led to over 100,000 Fijians becoming unemployed or being restricted to reduced hours and wages. Close to 50% of our tourism businesses were fully closed, with 35% active but with reduced staff. The challenges brought by the COVID-19 pandemic completely blindsided our tourism industry, and close to 29% of tourism businesses were expected to reach the point of bankruptcy. The direct impact on the tourism industry mainstays such as our airline, accommodation providers and tourism activity providers then triggered a secondary impact on all those industries that help supply, produce additional services to these industries. While the economic shocks were felt and continue to be felt throughout all different parts of Fijian society, the situation also emphasized the importance of our oceans and ecosystems as a source of life and sustenance, as well as the basis for the tourism we are able to benefit from. In many cases, Fijians became even more reliant on our natural resources and marine assets as a source of food and income. Fiji's National Ocean Policy, launched in 2020, supports the same sentiments and is focused on future-oriented objectives designed to help preserve and protect our marine environment and the biodiversity it supports. The policy envisions a healthy ocean that sustains the livelihoods and aspirations of current and future generations of Fijians through actions and priorities that are required to secure our maritime space and enable sustainable management practices to be perpetuated throughout Fiji's exclusive economic zone. Our National Ocean Policy has become even more relevant and urgent in its priorities in light of COVID-19 and the additional strain the pandemic has put on already climate-vulnerable livelihoods. Through this policy, Fiji has taken steps to mobilize resources to support activities that deal with the multifaceted challenges and threats to our oceans and the society, cultures, economy, and identity it sustains. As further testament to our commitment, Fiji incorporated an ocean target within our updated nationally determined contribution to the UNFCCC. We have committed to designating 30% of our exclusive economic zone as marine protected areas. We went then further, legislating this target and commitment within our Climate Change Act passed in 2021. Through this commitment, we are taking steps to scale up the protection of our biodiversity while also helping to protect the life and resources that attract tourists, as well as the basis of our sustainable financing practices. But these actions are also about promoting the leadership that we hope will be replicated worldwide and the type of action needed to ensure the ocean can continue to support life on Earth while also continuing its vital functions such as a source of oxygen and as the world's largest carbon sink. The Climate Change Act now means that our National Ocean Policy has the legal mandate required to give it hold and relevance throughout our governance and a basis for influencing the actions taken by our private sector. A significant example of steps taken to support and operationalize our National Ocean Policy has been through the recent signing of a Memorandum of Understanding with the Wade Foundation. This MOU creates a 5-year work program designed to support our efforts to sustainably manage 100% of our EEZ while also designating 30% as marine protected areas. This partnership and the collaborative intent of our approach to ocean management will help us to increase both the resilience and economic productivity of our marine zones. As reported by the World Bank, Pacific Island countries could gain approximately $250 million per year if governance and enforcement measures are improved and reformed to better prioritize and ensure the sustainability and security of ocean resources such as fisheries. The IPCC also further estimates that almost all warm water corals will experience significant losses with warming of 1.5 degrees. We are on track for 2.7 degrees of warming, which would be catastrophic for our ocean ecosystems and our ocean-dependent tourism sector. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, Fiji's medium, small and micro enterprises, the cornerstone of economies and communities, suffered greatly, with close to 74% having either closed temporarily, permanently or operating on reduced hours. The Fijian government rapidly responded to COVID-19 with a range of emergency support measures, apart from investing in a blue economy, and this includes credit guarantee schemes for businesses, job support schemes for the unemployed, concessional financing for small businesses, and relief programs and cash assistance for those in need. We have also taken forward new reforms to accelerate recovery. To improve the competitiveness of the tourism sector, in the last budget, the Fijian government reduced all major tourism-related taxes and introduced attractive tax incentives to stimulate new and reinvestments in the sector. A number of other policy measures have also been put in place to promote growth in other economic sectors with the aim of further economic diversity. Looking ahead, Fiji's remarkable pace of vaccinations has enabled government to gradually ease COVID-19 restrictions and reopen borders for international travel. A double-digit growth is projected for 2022, possibly the highest ever growth in our post-independence history. The revised 2021-2022 budget builds upon the better than earlier anticipated recovery in the tourism sector and the overall economy, and is designed to align revenue projections with recent economic developments and recalibrate expenditures based on current performance, with spending reprioritization where needed. While we can take action to prompt recovery from the pandemic, we cannot offset to tackle the impact of climate change on our economy and environment through the same means. Development partners need to provide more concessionary finance and grant that both reduce the cost of which countries like Fiji can borrow and help small ocean-dependent countries invest in climate-resilient ports and other infrastructure that will be vital to creating a sustainable blue economy. The confluence of COVID-19's current impacts and the rising costs and risk driven by the climate crisis calls for concerted action to protect and enhance our environments and ecosystems at an unprecedented scale. The importance of the ocean to our world, to humanity and our survival is undeniable. The ocean needs our assistance in ensuring its health, and we need the ocean for the ecosystem services that it provides, which also results in the billions of dollars contributed towards the world economy. Small island states must use the new economic reality of the pandemic and the climate crisis to deliver policies and economic reforms that put priority on innovation. Conservation and protection of our ocean is not a preference, but a moral duty and global economic imperative. Vinaka Vakalevu, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that contribution. I have to say that, again, the insights being given here today are really food for thought. I think it was really insightful that our last presenter mentioned the economic shock that stemmed from COVID, what occurred in Fiji, but the fact that this helped to shift the emphasis to the natural resources and the marine economy that needed to be protected. I think, again, mention that's made of some specific financing vehicles such as concessionary financing and grants, and this will help invest in a sustainable blue economy, and that we have to be aware of the reciprocal relationship between humanity and the ocean. The ocean literally provides the very air that we breathe. We really should strive to do all we can to protect and invest in the blue economy. And there was also mention made of the 5-year work program, so some definitive economic measures by the government of Fiji to help build back resilience in the face of COVID-19. So thank you very, very much to Kushal for that recorded message. We're now going to hear from Sylvia Garillo, the Senior Vice President and Chief ESG Officer of Royal Caribbean Group. Sylvia, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and thank you to the Island Innovation Group for this very kind invitation and allowing the Royal Caribbean Group to share what the private sector is doing with respect to sustainable development in island communities. First, let me give you a little bit of background on the Royal Caribbean Group And then I'll talk about our recent ESG framework, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we do in terms of the principles that we strive to apply in as we develop in projects, both commercial and what we also call private destinations in the island communities. So the Royal Caribbean Group owns and operates 3 cruise vacation brands, the Royal Caribbean International, Celebrity Cruises, and Silversea. And we're also 50% owners of TUI Cruises and Hapag Cruises in Europe. Miami is our hometown, even though we're in a virtual mode during this conference. I think a lot of us are probably listening either from Miami or close to Miami and all the island communities around here. Miami is considered the cruise capital of the world. We've been headquartered here since 1969. And if any of you have, seen our ships, you probably don't know the enormously complex operations that are behind the operation and movement and deployment of these ships. We are a ship that generates all of our power. We manage all of our water and waste, and we visit destinations around the world that really require a very strong focus on responsible tourism. And as Stacy just mentioned, our ocean health is significant, not only for all of us and our the health of our ecosystems, the health of our planet, and our own human health. It's critical to our business, not just because we sail over the ocean, but taking care of the ocean, which is 71% of our planets, really impacts our right to operate, particularly in coastal communities. That's why we're very focused on contributing to the socioeconomic success of the communities where we operate, by sourcing locally or working with local businesses, and working with local stakeholders on our destination management plans so that our ships don't represent a burden to the coastal communities. We certify our local partners, our tour operators, with responsible tourism practices. We place an enormous amount of effort on reducing our emissions. We've equipped 100% of our ships to be landfill free and work with local representatives and governments to establish green hubs and recycling programs. We produce 90% of our own water, and we have a state-of-the-art wastewater management system. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we recently revamped our ESG framework, our environmental, social, and governance framework, which is centered on our corporate purpose to deliver the best vacations responsibly. Our strategy is focused on 5 pillars. The first pillar is to champion communities and the environment. For us, this means to be accountable to the communities that we visit and the destinations that we operate in. The second pillar is to provide an unforgettable cruise experience. This is for us to connect our guests to the world's best destinations on the best ships. Our third pillar is to foster human rights and to be an employer of choice. We want to create an environment where all people are respected, treated equally, and are engaged. Our fourth pillar is to advance net zero innovation. We want to do our part in reducing our impacts related to climate change, energy consumption, and emissions. And our fifth pillar is to govern responsibly. So we embed the appropriate policies and practices for all of our ESG or environmental and social issues, in addition to ethics, compliance, and data security within our operations. Basically, this framework and our strategy codifies what we consider our commitment to be a good neighbor and our fundamental belief in campsite rule number 1, which is to leave the places we visit better than we found them. Now, how do we put this into action in the 3 areas that I mentioned, the environment, the social aspects, and the governance aspects? As I mentioned before, this framework guides our actions in the way that we develop our local and private destinations, or even commercial aspects or infrastructure of our operations, such as ports or landing facilities. So on the environmental side, we strive to be 0 carbon or better. So we're always looking for ways that in which we can partner for the development of green energy production in the destinations where we operate. We reduce and reuse waste. We're landfill free, but there are areas where, for example, the local facilities are not part of a green hub and cannot reduce or reuse or recycle their waste. So we work with local government representatives to find solutions, and whatever we can't, right now we have 85% of our landfill program that is destined for green hubs, and the remaining 15%, if we cannot find a facility for that, we divert it to a facility that converts that waste into energy. And thirdly, on the environmental side, we do everything that we can to protect biodiversity. So when we are changing any aspect of our operation, or when we are developing a new commercial or private destination, we conduct our impact assessments and do work locally with the local experts and with local stakeholders to make sure that we protect native species, such as the plants, the corals, the fish, the entire ecosystem. And if we do find that there is something, for example, an area of coral reef that which potentially is part of the area where we're going to develop, we will actually make changes to our development plans to make sure that that coral reef is protected. On the second pillar, the social pillar, there's also 3 aspects. We work to catalyze local prosperity. So we work very closely with local entrepreneurs to help them achieve business growth. We hire locally from the destinations where we operate, and we offer job skill training to help build a local labor force. We buy locally and always strive to sustainably source products and supplies through local businesses and vendors, not only with respect to goods and services that we have on the ship, but also with respect to the construction and operation of our facilities. And thirdly, we also work very closely with local government and stakeholders to amplify local culture. We want to make sure that our guests and our crew, as well as everyone that's associated with our cruise ships, celebrates cultural heritage by focusing on and celebrating the local designs, local food, and local music. I think this is what our guests look for in their experiences, and I think it's the best that represents the local destinations. And then thirdly, on the governance side, what we're hoping to do is eventually, once we complete these principles and actually pilot certain programs that we're looking into now for the implementation, the full implementation of these principles, we want to create a playbook. We're doing this in partnership with the World Wildlife Fund. And we'd like this playbook to be an open source so that we can collaborate and learn together on what we've done and how we can continuously improve. We believe very much in transparency. So we will and always do share our environmental assessments and our environmental management plans for each of the destinations and commercial infrastructures that we build and operate. And last but not least, as I mentioned earlier, we work with the Global Sustainable Tourism Council to certify tour operators in responsible tourism practices in the destinations where we visit. We had a goal of certifying 1,000, and we met and exceeded that by certifying 2,000. And now that we are back in service, we're going to take that number and drive for thousands more. So thank you again, Stacy and the group at Island Innovation for this opportunity. I'm very happy to join you and all of your guests and look forward to our continuing work together.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you. I think that was a really inspiring and heartwarming presentation that you gave us. I think it really was heartening to hear, the belief in collaboration and the belief in the socioeconomic success of, those who inhabit local coastal communities. We have to be each other's keeper, as it were, and, work with local stakeholders to not just, as you say, leave the places you visit better, leave the places you visit the same as, but better than when you found them. And I think that ties into the concept of regenerative tourism, which is a whole other aspect of tourism that is much more beneficial and, is based on different paradigms. So we can see all of the positive aspects of tourism that can come there. Your mention of green hubs and recycling programs. So there's some definitive steps that you're putting in place, which I think, again, through collaboration, we can all learn that there has to be a holistic approach to what we're trying to achieve. And I think that when you mentioned championing communities and the environment and, that concept of accountability and transparency, which, two things that are crucial to any kind of effective financial deployment. So when we look at the financial way to help this coastal quandary that we're facing, we have to be aware of accountability. We also have to be aware of kind of that moral imperative mentioned by, I think it was Dr. Joseph who mentioned this, as well as some of our other speakers. The idea that, we have to seek accountability in a way that's regenerative and a way that's collaborative, so that, all coastal communities can have that fighting chance and remain resilient. So thanks very much for your presentation. It was really enjoyable. Thanks, Sylvia. Okay, we're going to go on, and I won't say that we'll save the best for last. We have Petero Manufa, who is representing the Pacific Territories. So we are really looking forward to hearing your speech. You're the CEO of the Tourism Authority in the government of Kiribati. Petero, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us at what is, I know, very, very early in the morning for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stacy. Sorry, can I share my screen just to start my presentation?
Sure, we'll have someone in the team help you share your screen.
Thank you. All right. Can you please confirm if you're able to see my my screen?
We can see your screen, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacy. Welcome to Banini Maori and warm greetings, ladies and gentlemen, from the Republic of Kiribati here in the center of the Pacific. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge Island Innovation for this wonderful opportunity to share with you our story from this part of the world, but no doubt a story that we're all familiar with as one family of island nations and island destinations. My name is Petero Manufa, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Tourism Authority of Kiribati, and I'm also honored to be part of an esteemed panelist this morning. It's 3 a.m. going on to 4 a.m. here in Kiribati, and it's not a problem for me because we're the first country to welcome every new day anyway. So it's a pleasure to be here and be part of this very insightful panel. Ladies and gentlemen, Kiribati. For those of you who may not know where Kiribati is, one of the easiest way of identifying us on the map is looking for where the equator meets the international date line. Where these two lines cross, that is basically where Kiribati is. We are a unique and emerging Pacific Island destination, and as a nation, Kiribati is dispersed over 3.5 square kilometers, a million kilometers, sorry, of which only 811 square kilometers is made up of land. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, not only are we a coastal tourism destination, but we're also, in a lot of ways, an ocean destination. We sit on all hemispheres of the world, you know, and also we spread over a vast area of ocean, where traveling from one side of the country to the other is equivalent to flying from Los Angeles to New York, just to put it into perspective for those of you who may not be familiar with Kiribati. As a tourism destination, obviously I am not a climate change expert, but obviously an advocate like many of us. But so my presentation this morning will really be touching on how tourism in Kiribati is pushing the agenda or using its influence to be a positive mitigator to the impacts of climate change on our very fragile island environment. As a destination, we're a niche-driven destination where activities such as fishing thrive here. But as a people, we are warm, friendly, and very welcoming, and also live a very culturally rooted and a life that values family, tradition, and religion over everything else. But as a nation, like most of our other island destinations, we're also at the forefront of the impacts of climate change. So with Kiribati, just to give you a better understanding, in 2006, the government of Kiribati recognized through its 20-year vision that and prioritizes sustainable tourism as having the potential to contribute to stimulating the economic development of this island nation, and of course with other benefits that comes with developing tourism, such as employment, income generation, cultural preservation, but highlighting specifically sustainable management of our vulnerable natural environment assets. And so in that respect, the government recognizes the role that tourism has in preserving our vulnerable island communities to the impacts of climate change, global warming and climate change. This, ladies and gentlemen, saw the establishment of the organization that I'm a part of. We're a very new organization. We're only established in 2019, but with a lot of work on our plate. We're tasked to drive the development of Kiribati in tourism, the development of tourism in Kiribati through the development of right policies and regulations that will enable tourism to prosper, whilst at the same time ensuring its contribution to the management and the preservation of our island communities. So to put it into context again, ladies and gentlemen, we're a very young destination in the process of developing a pathway to sustainability and resilience. And we realize that we only have one shot at this, so we're really trying our best to get it right the first time around. So with Kiribati, are we a coastal tourism destination? Through and through, like most of you are. And our priority really is on resilience and sustainability. And as many of you would know, it is for the obvious reasons. For this, ladies and gentlemen, part of our planning in 2021, we developed the Kiribati Sustainable Tourism Development Policy Framework. And the framework actually frames the way that we intend to proceed with the development of Kiribati along the lines of sustainability and resilience, with 7 goals, and the number one goal being that tourism must protect the natural environment, and there's just no two ways about that. On the outlook of the future of coastal tourism in a Pacific and Kiribati context, the way we look at it, ladies and gentlemen, is that we face an enormous threat that coastal tourism destinations such as Kiribati must recognize that the greatest threat to us is climate change and with impacts such as coastal erosion, sea level rise, and the adverse weather conditions. However, we will use that threat and identify the opportunity on how we can turn things around here in our small island destination, because we know that what will define us as a coastal tourism destination is the action that we take to mitigate the adversity on our fragile coastal destination, which is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In saying this, ladies and gentlemen, coastal tourism destination, we believe that coastal tourism destination must also be intentional and acknowledge that sustainable tourism is the way to go, and resilience and adaptation must be woven into the fabric, into the very essence of how they strategize to move the destination forward, because as we
Oh, I think we may have a problem.
climatic conditions. Now, on the issue of finance, can finance improve the future of coastal tourism? Definitely. For us here in Kiribati, I'd like to discuss two approaches that we look at finance as a way to improve the future of coastal tourism. As you know, island destinations are also defined as having minimal access to finance. We don't enjoy the funds that our larger countries enjoy. So we're stretched with our resources, and a lot of us rely heavily on financing of the future of coastal tourism. In that, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, that in the case of Kiribati, government works with development partners to develop the appropriate infrastructure that enables the growth of tourism. Examples of these include here on the island that I'm based in, we have, and as a low-lying atoll, water access is always a challenge. Through a project that government has embarked with development partners, $25 million is going to be spent on a water project that aims to provide every citizen 70 liters of water per day through a desalination plant, which relieves the stress of accessing underground water or having to rely on rain. Also, there's a lot of commitment from government in the transport sector with shipping. They have tiered approaches through the Kiribati National Shipping Line to acquire different ships, not for tourism, but really to increase accessibility into the outer islands, and as well as our national airline, Air Kiribati, with the aim to increase their fleet by 200% by August 2022. There's also projects in energy with a renewable energy solar farm, and as well as roads and communication. The reason why I'm highlighting these developments, ladies and gentlemen, is because they enable the growth of coastal tourism. They allow for the access and the supply chain and the movement of goods and services out into the outer islands where tourism is expected to thrive. The movement of employees into these islands, and as well as eventually the travelers that will visit our islands. But that's one way of us looking at financing of coastal tourism development here in Kiribati. The second part to it, ladies and gentlemen, I think a lot of our audience today can relate to, is on investment and the fact that tourism is a private sector driven industry. Unfortunately, in island destinations such as Kiribati, we still require that commitment from government to support us and also the private sector. Resilience and adaptation in coastal tourism destinations, ladies and gentlemen, also comes at a cost. And we recognize that investors today are looking for sustainable investments that can be drawn to destinations that publicly commit to sustainable tourism commitments, whether it's the Glasgow Declaration, or for us here in the Pacific, we have the Pacific Sustainable Tourism Commitment that we require all ministers of tourism to be a party to, and really to give us that affirmation that we do have the support on a regional basis that sustainable tourism is the way to go for the Pacific. We understand that the private sector investment alone, though, is not sufficient to drive tourism development in our island state, and which is why we recognize the importance of a public-private partnership for island destinations such as Kiribati and for the rest of the Pacific, because most island destinations do not have the benefit of multinational corporations or large hotel chains to support in infrastructure development. We also recognize that private sector or private foreign direct investors, their priority is to grow their business. And obviously, their participation in climate action can be secondary to what their core goal of making money is. And this is why we need government support and that joint venture working together that will help the destination grow in the direction that we want it to. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude in saying that, and again, from a Pacific Islands perspective, that we must acknowledge that coastal tourism is prevalent in most of the world's vulnerable island destinations, and therefore adequately financing it, whether it's through infrastructure development or whether it's through private investment and any other forms of investment or financing that my fellow presenters would have touched on. This will be vital for us to be able to achieve the level of sustainability and ensuring the resilience and the continuity of our island destinations, and most importantly, ensuring that tourism is a positive contributor to this aim that we all have as island states, to really ensure that we do not disappear in 50 years' time, that we remain relevant, and we've only got one home, and we must do all we can to protect it. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you again for your attention and welcome any questions that you may have for Kiribati and for the Pacific in this panel discussion. Compassion Rapa.
Oh, thank you so very much. First of all, thank you so very much for these absolutely stunning images that you've shared with us that really help us to see just how precious our ocean is, just how precious we are as island communities, you know, what we can bring to our quality of life by protecting our oceans and our biodiversity. Thank you so much, Peter. I loved your emphasis on the fact that we're a family of island communities. We have to look to what we have in common with each other and how we can help each other in ways that are meaningful. And the emphasis on the fact that tourism can in fact play a positive role in helping build resilience, I think is crucial. That's something that we need to embrace in order to move forward. I think the idea of the sustainable tourism policy framework is important because we can see we have to have certain legislative and legal underpinnings to any policy framework for them to be really valid and for them to gain some momentum and move forward. And then, of course, there's the collaboration with the various sectors, the collaboration, you know, the private sector and the public sector. Without collaboration, you know, we're not really going to see anything effective happen, I don't think. So your two approaches you mentioned, I think the idea of, yes, it's true that we unfortunately tend to have minimal access to financing. And so, you know, working with development partners, obviously to do things like water projects and renewable energy projects that you mentioned of, tie these to sustainable development of your tourism sector. So, you know, there's a holistic approach to everything being very effective. And the idea that investors are seeking sustainable investments, we can link this actually to the concept of impact investing, where investors are looking for something that may have a social return, quote unquote, rather than a fiscal return. So, you know, this is something that we have to look at as being very valid. So really appreciate that. And we have some really positive comments in the chat. Everyone's enjoying the presentations. We have a question and answer. We're going to go a little bit over time because this has been so fantastic. So we have some great questions. So I'm going to have a look in the Q&A now, and we're going to start posing some questions. So we do have a question here specifically to do with coastal ecotourism. Now, I think any of our panelists can answer this. Specifically on coastal ecotourism, where the opportunities and potential benefits for local communities seem good. What are the key challenges in looking at ecotourism for coastal communities. Does anyone want to take that one on? Dr. Joseph, would you like to give that a try? I see you.
I would say one of the key challenges is to ensure they have the right business partner, because a lot of these things, they need to make money. Let's be honest. We're here from both sides. The investor is looking to make money and the island is looking to make money. Is to ensure that this is not an extractive process where everything is taken away and nothing is given back. And that wherever investor you get or wherever finance partner you get is actually working in collaboration with you to ensure that the project that you embark on is actually sustainable, and that that some of the benefits of the projects that come actually go back to the local community and is not only for the investor. That's one of the main challenges. And because a lot of our islands are so cash strapped and our fiscal space does not allow certain things, and we may be in a hurry to get something done, that we do not take the time necessary to look through to ensure that the projects that are actually agreed on are actually beneficial in the long term for the communities that we're in.
Yes, I can add a couple of comments to Dr. Joseph's very, very significant comments. I think that excellent points. I would add that, ecotourism is an opportunity to really highlight the beauty of our island communities, and to do that in a way that is respectful of the environment. We welcome working with local ecotourism organizations that are operating under those same kind of visions, philosophies, and guidelines. And I would also add the significance of safety, because there are our guests are not necessarily guests that are looking to take on very, very significant adventures, to put it lightly, but rather, to really experience the beauty of the islands.
Thanks very much, Sylvia. Thank you. Well, since you're on the floor, we actually have a couple of questions. I've just kind of put them together. So we have in the chat a question: what way are the passengers, this is directed to you, Sylvia, offsetting their carbon footprint, as well as does Royal Caribbean purchase local products? So those are two questions that we have for you.
We don't have a view into how the passengers are actually offsetting their emissions. The way that they travel to our ships is wholly within their control. Sadly, I have to be honest, I have not seen a significant movement on that front, and there's a lot more that we can do in terms of offsetting and education. In terms of local sourcing, that is something that we do quite a bit, and we're also looking, post-COVID, now that we're ramping up our services, to re-engage with local suppliers to see on how we can increase that local sourcing. What would be important is not only to ensure that there's not only the type of volume that we would need, but the consistency and reliability of that sourcing. And also very important, so that sourcing is represents the local community and culture.
Thanks very much for that. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sylvia. Hey, Peter, I have a question here that I think we can address to you. Someone is asking, how can we try to embrace kind of a worldwide tourism network? In other words, we can see ourselves as island communities and a family of island communities. Is there a way that we can boost collaboration with each other and help those places that may not have the necessary resources to put sustainable tourism practices in place?
Thank you, Stacey. Well, certainly, I think that is one of the motivations behind why we join a forum such as this. And I think Island Innovation, without looking beyond this forum, is an excellent platform that we could look at opportunities and connect with like-minded destinations, if I may, with similar values or aspirations, and also similar challenges. And certainly, from a tourism perspective, I would say the United Nations World Tourism Organization, to see what their focus is on SIDS, and that segment of representation within the United Nations framework for tourism should be strengthened. And I really thank this question, because a lot of us are very isolated in our different parts of the world, and we don't realize that we share the same challenges with many other island destinations around the world. And so we should be looking to the highest body or organizations, and also on COP, whether there's an opportunity within COP, and I don't know if there already is one, for a specific tourism forum within that, on the margins of the next COP meeting, to look at and really bring in like-minded destinations, so that we can begin to work more as a community rather than working individually and trying to take on the whole world with the limited resources that we have. Thank you.
Thank you again. Yes, the power of collaboration to build resilience. I think we really do appreciate you pointing out that, yeah, we can use Island Innovation as a platform, and we need to continue this conversation. Remember, this is just the beginning of, I think it's going to be a very enriching journey for us to see how can we work together in this context. So we have another question. I'd like to address this to Dr. Joseph. I think this is our last question that we have. What role would you say that data management can play in helping with project development for projects to get better technical support in small island states, Dr. Joseph?
It's very important, because a lot of times we make decisions on political whim, or make decisions because the public, without the actual data to see what it says. So now, for Montserrat case, we're trying to build a port. We have to ensure that, do we know what's the effect of the corals? What plants do you have below? How many birds and bats use the area on the hillsides? That is important. So yes, I agree that data management should be part of our project development before you start, because they're not short-term things. You're making these projects not just for the short-term construction and the part that there, but it's a long-term view for the country. For generations, when we put certain things in place, we put a hotel in place, a port in place, these are generational things that will affect not only you, but your children and grandchildren. So it is important at the beginning to ensure you have the right information on which that decision is made, in terms of counting, in terms of the data. So yes, data management does play an important role.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joseph. I think you also brought in an excellent concept we hadn't necessarily thought of before. This idea of the intergenerational effect of climate change and the intergenerational equity that we need to put in place to make sure that we are, letting our children inherit, an earth that we also enjoyed. I mean, there is a saying that we do not, our children do not inherit the earth from us. We actually borrow the planet from them. So we have to do all that we can to build resilience. So on that note, I know we've gone over time, but it's been such an incredible discussion. I actually would like to chat some more, but I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Thanks so much to Peter, Sylvia, and Dr. Joseph, and to all our attendees. I think I see a request. There's a question here that someone has put in the question and answer. This is to do with attracting investors for funds to do with projects and air mobility between islands. Yes, we do have, but I see that a member of our team is going to answer this question. So thank you so much to the panel. Thanks everyone for attending. We really appreciate the time, and thanks so much again. And we hope, as I said, this is just the beginning of a conversation we can keep having. Thanks so much. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Okay, bye.